Everybody, welcome. I am the Sharply Dressed Man, and this is going to be the first New World video that I'm shooting that's not just going to be me running through a dungeon with some of my friends. This is primarily, I just wanted to focus on answering a couple questions that I've been getting about the dungeons that I run, the specs that I use, why I do the things that I do. The first question I wanted to answer today is Spear Bow my favorite weapon combo? And do I have any other preferences? And the answer to this question is, yeah, Spear Bow is very powerful. It's great. I use it all the time, and I do like it. I like the buffs and debuffs it provides. But I kind of fell into this role because it was what my group needed at the time, right? So when I started picking up this game again, 2.5 months ago or so, I really wanted to get into high-level mutated dungeons, and my team already had a tank, they already had a healer, they already had a strength DPS, but what they didn't have is a dex DPS, right? So I picked up the spear and the bow to kind of fill in that dex DPS gap. Thankfully, it also has a bunch of, it does, pretty decent damage, and it has a bunch of buffs and debuffs that I can bring to the team. I can bring, let's see, Spear Bow has 3 different sources of weaken, right? You've got Enfeebling Skewer. You have Perforate, which has a weaken built into it from the skill tree. And you have Enfeebling Poison Shot, right? So I do a great job of mitigating the damage that my tank receives during any of the dungeons, and I do this just by doing my job, right? So just by DPSing, I also minimize the damage that my tank gets. I also have a pretty reliable source of rend, right? So you also get Perforate also has a rend built into it. It's a 15% rend for targets below 50% and 30% rend for targets above 30% or 50%, right? So it's a pretty nice combo for both increasing the damage that your team deals plus mitigating the damage that your tank takes. And it also has the benefit of, I'm at ranged, so I get a good, it's harder for me to die because I get more time to respond to attacks that might be coming my way. And I can also do things like, pull monsters that, the tank needs pulled out of packs from across the map. And it also, if I'm in the resource gathering role for the mutations, Spear Bow generally does lower damage, so the team has less taken away from it. If I go do something, like go gather something, it's actually beneficial because the team suffers less if I go do it. So it's a high utility role. It does pretty good damage, and it's something that I feel like I can really excel at. The other half of that question is, do I have any other preferences for weapons? And the answer is yes. I really like the Great Sword and the Fire Staff. I love these weapons. The Great Sword, I think, is super fun to use because it has this kind of like mini game built into it with the stacking bleeds. You can stack your bleeds up to 5 times, but if you're trying to weave in your Great Sword weapon skills, you also have to weave in your heavy attacks so the bleed doesn't fall off. I think that's a lot of fun. And the Fire Staff just does huge damage, so when I can, I really like picking that up too. But primarily you're going to see me on Spear Bow. Tank-wise, don't really do it very much, so that's going to be very rare. I haven't healed in this game ever, so I might pick that up at some point. But in the meantime, you can see me on Dex DPS. The second question that I've been receiving is, how do I deal damage with seemingly random gear? How do I I think the question behind this is effectively, how do I maximize damage in New World? Right? And I think this is a really, really important question. And you're going to see me doing this a lot at the beginning of dungeons, and actually I cut this out before I all of my buffing that I do for the videos that I record occurs before I hit record, right? So you don't really see me applying a lot of this, but I think this is a really great question, and it really comes down to just a few things. This is like, there's like a checklist that you need to go through. The first bit of it is, of course, using the highest gear score weapon you have access to. So in this case, do you have 700 gear score weapons? I do in this case. I have 700 gear score spear, bow, and I have the artifact Void Gauntlet. So all the artifacts are gear score 700. Makes it really easy to get some higher level weapons. But yeah, make sure, number one, that you're using the highest gear score weapons you have access to. The second thing is you have a number of buffs available to you, and all of these added together give you some huge advantages that you don't want to pass up. The first is, are you using powerful honing stones? This is 7% extra damage. Are you using the proper food? In this case, I use Dex. I also have all of my stats. Secondarily, I have all of my stats allocated into Dex. So I'll go over that in just a moment. Stats and Dex. The third thing is, are you using coatings? So are you using infused coatings, and are you using the right coatings? This is 15% extra damage against the enemy type that the coating is designed for. And this has to be applied twice. You have to do this on each weapon. The honing stone you only need to apply once. It applies to everything. The coatings have to be applied to each weapon. So I use 2 infused coatings every time I go. Do you have your trophies? So this is 5%. If you have a great trophy, or a major trophy, for the enemy type that you're fighting, that's 5% per trophy times 3. So that's another 15% extra damage, right? Do you have gems in your gear? I use diamonds. I use cut pristine diamonds. There's an argument to be made for using like fire gems if you're on Angry Earth, or other gems that align with the weaknesses of the enemies that you're fighting. I use cut pristine because it's usually applicable. It applies to everything, and it has right around the same effect. So I find myself having to swap gems less frequently. But this is 15% extra damage when at full health. This is the other perk of being ranged, is I get to stay at full health a lot. So if you add all this up, this is what, 15, 30, 45, 52. So this is, if you do all of this, you have additional plus 52% damage. Passively. Right, so that's just the things that you can do before you even get into the dungeon. Using the right weapons, make sure you're using a honing stone, make sure you've got your food, make sure you're using your infused coatings that correspond to the enemy that you're fighting, make sure you've got 3 times trophies up, the highest quality that you've got, any additional percentage is useful. Are you using the right gems? Again, I use cut pristine diamonds, but I recommend doing your own research and figuring out which one works best for you. Particularly if you're melee, you're probably going to be taking more damage, so you may or may not be at full health all the time. Other things that you should be taking into consideration, stacking Rens. Rens stack up to 50% armor reduction. I should reword this as damage increase. So, you definitely want to, and these are additively applied, right? So the great thing, like I was saying about the spear, is that we have Rend on Perforate. That stacks up to either 15% or 30%, depending on the enemy's hit points. If you're using the Life Taker, so let's see, Perforate on Spear. Life Taker is great for this. Life Taker is actually extremely good because it applies a 10% rend per ranged attack, stacking 3 times. And it also has a dot. on top of that. That also stacks up 3 times. So if you're using Life Taker, Life Taker works whether you have it out or not. So if you have your bow out and you have your Life Taker in your other weapon slot, every arrow that you fire applies a 10% rend and 1 stack of the dot. So you have a number of options available to you. You could also work with your teammates. Do they have weapons that stack rend? The important thing is to have as much as you can all the time. And then finally, the same thing applies to Enfeeble, but that's a different conversation. Then finally, are you using the right weapon spec? I'm not going to go too much into what I think is the right weapon spec for every weapon, but I will just very briefly go over the weapon specs that I'm currently using for bow and spear. So right now I'm using Whirlwind, or I'm sorry, Cyclone instead of Sweep. I find Sweep, Coup de Grace has a lot of damage, but there's a really long wind-up animation for Coup de Grace that you can actually get knocked out of, and I find that when I'm in melee range that happens more often than not. So I went with Cyclone instead, which is a real quick, upfront, instant damage. Perforate and Skewer. So you can take a look at this and maybe use this build if you're interested. I find it really useful, particularly if I'm using an Enfeebling Skewer Spear, which you should absolutely be using Enfeebling Skewer if you have access to that. Then finally, here's my bow build that I'm currently using. This one focuses more on, so I'm using Rapid Shot for single target damage, and I'm using Rain of Arrows and Poison Shot. Poison Shot is in this build for Enfeebling Poison Shot, to help out the tank. And I just switched over to Life Takers, so I'm using Rain of Arrows here because it looks like Rain of Arrows may apply Life Taker's debuff in an AoE fashion. I haven't tested this out yet, so we'll see. But it does say ranged attacks, so I have confidence that it will. Anyway, Rain of Arrows for AoE, Poison Shot for AoE, Rapid Shot for a single target. And that's it. That's what I'm currently using right now. So, thank you very much, everybody. Those were the 2 questions. You know, why do I use bow spear all the time? Do I have any other weapon preferences? The answer is, it's because it's the role that I found myself in, and I happen to do a pretty good job at it. Will you see me doing other things in the future? Probably, but for now, bow spear. I just want to make sure that we get a good foothold into the expansion before, checking anything else out. And the second thing is, how do I do damage in this game? There's a lot to it, but effectively comes down to make sure you're using all the buffs that you've got available to you, and make sure you're working with your team to apply rends to your targets to reduce their armor. And the third thing is to manage your empowers, but I didn't really get into that in this conversation. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed it. If you found this at all useful, feel free to leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like. I'll be uploading many more videos about New World in the future. So if you like this form of conversation where I'm answering questions, please let me know, because a lot of my content so far has been me running through dungeons, and it's very much based on my Twitch stream. So this is the first video that's been bespoke, made for YouTube. Thanks a lot, folks. I'll see you all next time.